So for this assignment, I'll start off with the ecological influences I noticed in this article based on Brontenberger's ecological model. The first one was the friends and peers influence. This article was specifically talking about different ethnic groups, and cross mixing in friend groups. So I noticed that the friends and peers had a big influence on an individual's attitudes towards other ethnic groups, especially when they were younger. Because like as they get older into adolescence, they're gonna have new settings, new people that they can interact with. Just especially with the rise of like social media and stuff, there's so much more ways to get information about different groups that the close knit friend group that they have in their personal life isn't their biggest source of information anymore. And then the second one I noticed was about the European kids. It said that European kids may over exaggerate their want of cross ethnic friend groups to appear not prejudiced. So the ecological influence there would be just the past experiences, the past negative experiences that different ethnic groups have had, and how the European kids are now going to over exaggerate their want of cross mixed ethnic friend groups just so that they don't appear prejudiced, just like many people were in the past and still are even today. So that was the second ecological influence. The two questions I had, the first one was, why does perceiving inclusive norms from in-group peers meaningfully contribute to enhancing children's interest in cross-group friendships, and to what extent does that happen? And then the second question I had, it was actually answered in the article. I wrote it down before I finished it just because it was a question I had. And it was, what causes the varying responses between races? So like why were the European kids more open to a friend with a different ethnicity than the African American and Latino American kids? And that was answered already in the article, and I also sort of answered it in my ecological influences part, the second one I had. So then, like going off of that, my second question, branching off of that one since that one was already answered, would be sort of like, what could we as a society do to fix that? If there would be a way to like, I mean, it's going to be hard to completely erase every prejudice that every kid and every adult is going to have about other ethnic groups. I don't think it's ever going to be fully possible to get rid of every single little bias and prejudice, but what could we sort of do to alleviate it slightly or to move on past that? And then moving on to the things that I notice will impact educators and counselors within their practice. So I want to be a teacher. I am majoring in education and human development. Excuse me. To be a secondary secondary English education teacher. So these are things that I would want to input into my own classroom, but also I think would be beneficial for other teachers and professionals in this work field. So the first one is that children are influenced very heavily by peers, especially when younger, because it is their main source of information outside of family. So in order to sort of get rid of some unfair prejudices and biases, it could be helpful to teach diversity in the classroom so that children can learn more about diversity in other ways of life, other people, other ethnic groups in a more educational and unbiased setting. That's not to say that like teaching it in the classroom is going to suddenly alleviate all biases and prejudices, but it can hopefully sort of alleviate some of them just because they're learning about it in a more unbiased setting compared to learning it from friends or family, because a lot of people do have unhealthy negative biases towards other people. So this could help alleviate that. And then the second thing that I mentioned for this is that teachers should know that prejudice is real and it can be passed down from parent to child. It very often is, just because children can only learn what they are taught. They don't come into the world knowing any information about other people. So instead of punishing kids that have these negative biases and prejudices, you should instead work to change it with them by teaching that diversity and stuff, because kids are going to come in and they might have biases and prejudices against other ethnic groups, but that's not necessarily their own opinion. It's probably an opinion that their parents or their peers or they saw online on the internet, depending on the age of the kid. So instead of just punishing them for saying something that could be seen as offensive, the teacher should work with them and say, hey, you shouldn't say that, this is why, let's move forward and not do that again. That type of correction without the punishment of it. And another way to sort of alleviate that, as I said before, is just teaching that diversity to build empathy. Kids aren't going to know about other people and their way of life if you don't teach it to them. So I think it's a very positive and influential, it's a very positive thing to be able to teach them about different people, different ways of life, just so that they can form and gain that empathy and those opinions towards people that look different than them, act different than them, have a different way of life, and all of that. Thank you.